Good morning, this is Dr. Rodney Davis, and my topic for this session is entitled 21st Century Curriculum Development, the New Framework. And what I've tried to do is look at how curriculum has changed in terms of the 21st century and the demands that the 21st century has placed on curriculum designers. And probably the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be new to you. I hope they are. I'm not going to really talk about curriculum from the typical standpoint and get into a lot of the nitty-gritty. I really want to get more into what's happening now and what needs to happen in Filipino schools. So, sorry that I can't be with you face-to-face and do this live. Travel commitments have just made that impossible. So I'm recording this presentation and then we'll send it on. So hopefully, if you have questions, you can always contact me. I'll be glad to answer those. So let's go ahead and get started in the workshop entitled 21st Century Curriculum Development, the New Framework. In keeping with the ways that I do a lot of presentations, I start out with kind of an overarching question. I call it the big question, and this is the thread that runs through the entire presentation, and then I come up with either 3 or 4 big ideas, and we'll look at those here. This will kind of give you a roadmap as to where we're going to go over this next hour or so. So the big question is, how has curriculum been changed to meet the demands and opportunities of the 21st century? Now, some might argue the 20th and 21st century are really not that different in what they expect of public schools. And I think here in the early part, the first quarter of the 21st century, we maybe could make that argument more believably. But I think as time goes on, we're going to see a marked difference in how schools are operated, how teaching is conducted, and how the curriculum is going to change to meet some of the new realities that we're experiencing in the 21st century. Now, the 4 big ideas deal with, number 1, history, and or theory. I haven't really decided whether I want it to be history or theory of curriculum, because I think if you talk about history, you're going to talk more about kind of some of the structural things. You're going to talk more about events and the names and dates and all that. Whereas if you talk about theory, you're going to talk some structure, but more about kind of the philosophy of how curriculum is done. So I'm trying to combine that into one idea, one big idea. And the second one deals with curriculum being the heart of education, and that really is. We won't have education without curriculum, and certainly curriculum is what defines a school. Then the third big idea deals with curriculum issues for the 21st century. So the demands that 21st century businesses are placing on schools, and how that is shaping what the schools are teaching. And then finally, I felt like you couldn't talk about curriculum unless you talked a little bit about instruction and kind of what that instruction is going to look like here in the 21st century. So those are the 4 big ideas that we're going to kind of tackle. We don't get to talk about them very deeply because our time is limited. So you're going to get kind of an overview of these big ideas. So when I say curriculum and you say curriculum, are we really talking about the same thing? One would hope on the very surface level that we can talk about curriculum as kind of a course of study. And then probably at the most basic level, that's exactly what we're talking about. But then nuances come in, and so our term curriculum may change a little bit. So here is a definition that I think really does kind of cover what curriculum is. It's a course or fixed study, course of study that is, at a college, university, or school. Typically it comes from the Latin word currere, meaning to run. And I thought that was interesting, a little bit of factual information about it, the etymology of the word. The word comes to us really from Roman times, and in those Roman times, the word curriculum, or currere, referred to the track where chariot races were held. It really didn't have anything to do with education. So you see a picture here of the Circus Maximus in Rome, and that was the chariot theater, chariot stadium, and so that was really what a curriculum was. But we have taken it to signify that curriculum is a course that one follows at a school. Now, I'm not the only one that's had a definition of curriculum. Here, Ralph Tyler, a noted expert in curriculum design, said that it was the sum of all the learning that students were going to experience, and it was planned by and directed by the school to attain its educational goals. So again, here we see that it's all of the learning that of students, and it's planned and directed by the school. Elliot Eisner, also curriculum educational philosopher, said that curriculum of a school could be conceived of as a series of planned events that are intended to have educational consequences for one or more students. So again, here we see that it's event-oriented, it's planned events, and that there is some outcome that the students are going to experience. So again, all of this in keeping with a course of study that students are going to take or complete as a part of their education. There are two specific roles that curriculum fulfills, and these roles, of course, have different perspectives on what is taught and how the students experience it. But those roles are, first, prescription, and the second is description. So, if curriculum is a prescription, and there are many that think that it is, then curriculum is what ought to happen in the classroom. And so, for that reason, then, curriculum assumes the function of a plan, and it is an intended program. So it not only as a plan, it has an intent, and therefore this intent is precedes instruction because it is a prescription. So it's what some expert thinks should take place in a classroom or as a part of a course of study. And so then it is more of a future-looking thing because the instruction has not happened yet. Just as a doctor gives you a prescription for an illness that you have, it's before the cure. They give you this medicine with the hopes that it's going to restore you to health. Now, notice then, if we look at curriculum as a prescription, then we look at it in the form of intent. Did whoever was responsible for implementing the curriculum follow the plan? That's how it's evaluated. Not so much on what the students did with it or how their grades were, but did you follow the plan? It's all about the inputs of curriculum. Now, the second role that curriculum often falls into is that of a description. So here, it's about event or it's about experience, and the point is we are being informed about what happened in the classroom. So the curriculum is the documentation of what took place as the teachers taught. And basically, it's a way for us to see curriculum in action. This is what happened in the classroom. And so the evaluation is different than a prescription because the focus is on the outcome. What was the result of the experiences in the classroom? did the experiences even take place? So, again, 2 roles for curriculum, and there may be plenty of others, but these are 2 very common ways of looking at curriculum from the point of view of a prescription or the point of view of a description. With slide 6, I know I risk telling you something that all of you know and know it extensively. But I felt like if we were going to talk about 21st century curriculum, I still felt like we needed to just remind everybody the types of curriculum that are out there. Now, you can look online and you'll find many more types listed than just these 4. But these are typically the 4 expressions of curriculum in a K-12 school, whether it's in the Philippines or here in the United States. These are the ones. Now, these names may not be names that you're familiar with, but I'll bet you when you look at what the definition of these are, you'll recognize them from your own college prep program. So the first one is the legitimate curriculum. This is the stated one. This is the published curriculum. It is approved by some governmental body, an accrediting body, and this is the one that when people ask to see the curriculum, this is what the school division office shows. Okay, here's what the curriculum of first grade is going to be. Now, the second form is the expected curriculum. And now this name might be a little bit strange to people, but this is the curriculum that's desired by the stakeholders. So even though they may not know it, they have certain things that they think their children should experience as a part of their education. So parents, business leaders, society in general, they have their idea of what the curriculum should entail. And not always is this curriculum realized, but portions of it do find their way into the school's legitimate or stated curriculum. The third type or expression of curriculum is called the experienced curriculum. And so this one is different than the stated because this is the approved curriculum, but it is one that the student actually experiences. This isn't there is a stated curriculum and these are the things that have to be covered, but then the teacher, when they close the door in their classroom, they take that stated curriculum and they put their own personal touch on it and they make it their own. So they are indeed teaching the legitimate curriculum, but oftentimes they modify it to the needs of their classroom, to their particular style of teaching. So it's a little bit different than the stated. And of course the last one is the hidden curriculum. This is the curriculum that's not actually taught, it's not set out to be taught, but it's the curriculum that is presented in the school to the children as these are things you need to know to get on in school. So how to walk in the hallway, use your inside voice, how to play nicely with other people, raise your hand when you want to ask a question or answer a question. These are the kinds of things we teach the kids to make the classroom work, to make the school function, to make things efficient, and so forth and so on. So this is kind of what we call the hidden curriculum. It's not what we really set out to teach, but it's what we do in order so that we can teach. So these are the 4 types of curriculum that you'll often see in a school somewhere. So in summation, curriculum then is a process. It's a guide. It's a plan. In other words, it's a prescription. And then for some, curriculum is an experience, an outcome, it's a subject. That's what we see in the definitions of curriculum. It's what we see in, of course, the 2 roles of curriculum. And then the 4 expressions of curriculum fit into this kind of hierarchy of what you see on slide number 7. And so this really becomes the basis of what takes place in the school. It really begins to help us to understand how it is the heart of what we do in the classroom as a part of teaching kids or part of the instructional process. Now, looking at slide number 8, we get the question, what do children need to know in order to survive? Very overarching question, but it gets to how curriculum is the heart of education. And so there are two operative words. There are two very critical words in this question. It's knowing and surviving, or know and survive. And you think about school and its purpose. Essentially, the purpose of school is to give students information, provide them an opportunity to apply that information, practice the application, so that they can survive when they get out of school. Now, survive may seem like a very low-level activity, but when a student leaves high school, they should be prepared to live on their own. Now, if they go on to college, that's great, and they can stay with mom and dad, but ultimately, the purpose of education is to help this child, this young person, to be able to survive on their own, take care of themselves, eventually start a family, and then help more children learn to things that they need to know and things that will help them survive. So then curriculum really answers the question, what do we need to know in order to survive? And it's different from culture to culture, country to country, and probably even within a country. Each area may identify some things that are specifically important for kids to know so that they can survive. So let's look at that in these next few slides. Just as it may be different knowledge in order to survive in different countries or different parts of countries, what you needed to know in different times may have been different as well. So here's ancient times. So what kinds of things did ancient man need to know in order to survive? Well, here are just three of them. They had to know how to make fire. They had to know how to find food, prepare food, and then provide shelter. Those are basic needs. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those are food and shelter kinds of needs. And those have to be met before higher needs can be met. And while you might not think it's a curriculum, because the parents are doing a lot of the teaching here, they're teaching the next generation how to make fires and how to secure food and build shelter, it becomes a very basic, informal, experienced curriculum. So what the teacher, the parent, is teaching is a form of a curriculum, and it's what the students are experiencing. They're only being taught what they need to know in order to survive. So think about our own survival today. And what is it we need to know, and what we need to know is very different than what, say, ancient man needed to know. So let's take a look at that. In modern times, maybe even just say the last 50 years, what we needed to know, it was very different from what we need to know today. So let's make it very practical. If we use 1980 as a dividing point, pre-1980 you have analog devices, post-1980 you have early digital and then more advanced digital, and you can see that 2021 is over towards the right. So as just an example of how things have changed and what we need to know, when would knowledge of computers and their applications be necessary for professional survival? Would it be more towards the 70s or more towards 2021? And I think most of us would say that it's probably closer to 2021 and beyond. Certainly there was knowledge that was necessary for the 70s that probably is no longer needed. For instance, a typewriter. How many offices today have typewriters? Now, maybe in the Philippines they still have quite a few, but throughout the world they don't. The other one that probably is most Filipino is the use of carbon paper instead of non-carbonless carbon paper, or making photocopies. No matter what store you go into, if you're going and they buy something, that salesperson is going to have a sales book with a carbon in it in order to make a copy of the sale, where that would probably not be something you would see in more developed nations. So knowledge like that is something that we had, say, back in the 70s and maybe even early 80s. But now it's not very common. I mean, if you want a duplicate of something, you just go over to the copier and you photocopy yourself a duplicate of it. Or you scan it with your phone. I mean, come on. Nowadays, people don't even make photocopies. They just take a picture of it and then they email it to you, instant message you the picture. So, yeah, our knowledge of devices is probably more necessary today than it was then. And so, as times change, what becomes important to teach also changes. So while curriculum is the heart of education, it is not something that remains the same throughout the ages. It changes as the needs of society change. A question that came to mind as I was working on the presentation, and I thought might be interesting to explore, is why is curriculum the heart of education? Why is it so central to what goes on in instruction? Now, I have a couple of reasons, and here's the first one, is that every society, whether in a developed country or an emerging country, has goals or objectives for that country or its people. And so to achieve those goals, oftentimes schools are modified to address those goals. So curriculum is changed to address those goals. So here's a picture. And this is the early 1900s in the United States, with the Irish people immigrating to our shores. And these Irish people were coming to the United States because there were jobs, factory jobs available to them. There weren't as many places to work in the old country, so they were coming because of the Industrial Revolution taking place in the United States. Between 1900 and 1915, just basically 15 short years, 15 million immigrants arrived in America. That's about the same number of immigrants arriving in the previous 40 years. So there were a lot of people coming. But the question then becomes, so how do we Americanize these people that are coming to the United States? Well, we want them to certainly assimilate into American culture, and the way you do that is you teach the children what it means to be an American. And one of the ways that schools did this was they adjusted the curriculum. And they chose books like you see here on the slide, a McGuffey Reader, and this was a book of readings, and a lot of times it was poems and things that were very American, and the topics were very American related. What does it mean to be an American? Why I like freedom, and all of that. So the curriculum was modified to help Americanize these immigrants coming here for work. And so this is one reason why curriculum is the heart of education, because it's used to meet societal goals. A second reason that curriculum is the heart of education is because that schools are the places where cultural values are transmitted from one generation to another. And so a lot of it comes when we talk about the history of a society, the cultural traditions of a particular society. Those are transmitted in the school. And so the school becomes that vehicle that helps present those ideas from one generation to the next. Now, certainly parents and other community organizations are involved in this, but the school is the primary way that we learn that. So, for instance, a very common saying here in the United States is that something is as American as motherhood, baseball, and apple pie. Those values of motherhood, baseball, and apple pie are traditionally American ideas. And so we communicate that to our children, or to children even if they're not native to the country. We communicate those to them so that they will know what it means to be an American in schools where it happens. Just like in the Philippines, the schools become the place where you learn what it means to be Filipino and your history and all the things that are important to you as a people. That gets communicated in the school so that when a child leaves at grade 12, they know they're fully immersed in Filipino culture. And even though each island, each area, region may have a little bit different tradition, there are still certain things that make you Filipino, and those get transmitted as a part of a child's education. For that reason, then, curriculum becomes a repository, a container that holds all of the things that students need to know in order to survive. And so from time to time that changes. We decide that certain things are no longer important for our kids to know, and they get removed from the curriculum, whereas new things get put into the curriculum itself. So this is a good way of seeing why and how curriculum is at the heart of what we do in school. And now let's kind of change directions a bit and look at curriculum more directly. Instead of looking at the history and the heart, let's look at curriculum itself. Take a look at slide 14. In the dark color, blue, you're going to see some characteristics. And you're going to see them. I want you to look at them, and I want you to think about your school. Do these attributes describe your school? Is your school teacher-focused? Is the curriculum fragmented or broken down into very discrete subjects, and that there is no cross between one subject and another? Do students typically work alone on individual assignments, or are they working in groups? Is much of what is done in the classroom about memorizing information, memorizing facts, memorizing theories? Do you typically focus only on comprehension, knowledge, and maybe some application? Do you teach with a textbook or without a textbook? In other words, does the textbook really drive what happens in the classroom? Next, is what's written the primary way that we assess learning? So what a student writes down in an essay, what they do on a worksheet, or what they do in an assignment, is the written word the way that we typically demonstrate what students have learned? Is the teacher the primary assessor or judge of what happens in the classroom? Does the teacher typically do all the grading in the classroom? This is more one that would be a perception of your students. Do they see that school or the curriculum is just irrelevant? It doesn't line up with what's happening outside of school? And then lastly, is the purpose of schooling to produce workers for industry and businesses? Is that the primary purpose, is to help kids get a job when they graduate? Well, if it is, congratulations, you have a 20th century school. Pretty noteworthy, since this is the 21st century. Having looked at the characteristics of a 20th century school, does that really describe your school? I'd be the first to tell you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a 20th century school. Trust me. A lot of schools are preparing kids for the 20th century. They're still doing it. And maybe in this first part of the 21st century, it's still okay. I think time is going to show us very, very quickly that it's not going to be enough as we get more towards the middle part of the 21st century, towards the end of the 21st century. I think there are going to be such demands placed on kids that what we were doing in the 20th century is not going to be enough. So if it describes your school, you say, well, Doc, there's nothing wrong with being a 20th century school. You're absolutely right. If the year was 1975, but the year isn't 1975, the year is 2021. And so what you're going to see in the remainder of the presentation is how that 21st century school is going to be different, and what we're going to have to do as educators to kind of shift the curriculum more in line with the demands of the 21st century. Now, I have to be careful because I don't want to sound critical. So a 20th century education might be okay. Not judging, I'm just saying. It might be okay if you want your graduates to work in a factory their entire life. Now, all work is honorable, and I'm firmly committed to that. And factory work is no less honorable than any other kind of work. So don't hear me criticizing people who work in a factory or people who work with their hands for a living. But understand that the 21st century is going to demand a different set of skills from its workers. And the question you have to ask yourself is, does your student have the right skills that they need in order to be successful in the 21st century? Now you say, well, there are always going to be factories. They are. There are always going to be factories out there. But more and more of these factories are using robots to do the more menial tasks, the very labor-intensive tasks, where higher skill levels are going to be needed for some of the jobs. So are your schools really prepared for the demands that the 21st century is going to place on your school? And that's really the question you have to ask yourself right now. So what does a 21st century classroom look like? And you can see some characteristics here. So the focus is on the student. The teacher's job is just to facilitate the learning that's going to take place in the classroom. The emphasis is on what can students do with what they know, and how are students different as a result of instruction. The focus is going to be on higher order thinking skills, the evaluation, the synthesis, the application piece of education, of learning. Much of what is taught comes from the student's own research. So students are going to be exploring topics that relate to a course of study, a set of standards, but the students are going to do the research, and the teacher is going to tie that together for the students. But the students are going to do a lot more digging in research to facilitate their own learning. And that's what's going to make learning exciting, because it's going to be very active. Students are going to be the ones engaged in the exploration, not the teacher finding it and just presenting it. Another aspect of a 21st century classroom that's very different than what we're seeing now is that there's a lot more collaboration between the students. I think we're going to see more group-related work, certainly a more project-based work as well. Students are going to have a greater amount of freedom when it comes to choosing the ways in which they demonstrate their learning. It's not going to just be the paper pencil test. It's not going to be the essay only. It's going to be, there are going to be choices. Here's choice 1, 2, or 3. You choose the way you want to present what you've learned from this inquiry. Grades are going to focus more on the amount of learning that is taking place rather than some arbitrary achievement scale that was created by a textbook company or what is just commonly done in schools. So, curriculum then probably is going to be more student designed, more student focused than anything else. And that really brings us to, so what is this curriculum going to look like for the 21st century? And that's what is exciting to me, is because I think we're going to see a radical shift in what we do in this area of curriculum. The skills that you're going to hear about that are necessary for the next generation of workers have been around for a long time, since the early 90s, when the United States Secretary of Labor impaneled a commission to investigate what were the kinds of skills the 21st century worker was going to have to have in order to be effective, in order to get jobs. And so they created this list of about 5 skill sets that workers were going to have, and we'll look at those here in just a moment. But really, nothing was done to turn those skills into curriculum, or curriculum was not adjusted to capitalize on those skills until the early 21st century, when a partnership of business leaders, educators, community leaders, and policymakers came together to form a new curriculum. The organization was called the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, but they created a curriculum that 21st century schools could adopt that would use the skills that they thought would be necessary in 21st century. So basically, this partnership, the goal of it was to identify skills for next generation workers, which really had already been done, and then encourage the development of those skills in today's students by designing a curriculum that schools could use or implement in order to do that. And so let's look at this curriculum in a little more depth. See on slide number 19 that the core skills are those that were identified in the SCANS report, which was the Secretary's Commission on All Necessary Skills, SCANS, S-C-A-N-S, and they identified 4 skills. Sometimes they break this into 5, but in this particular list they combine creativity and innovation, and then communication, collaboration, critical thinking / problem solving. So these are the skills that they feel will be necessary for workers in the 21st century. They need to have these skills and be able to use them well. The subjects that these skills are going to be presented in and used in would be the subjects you see here to the left: English, language arts, world languages, arts, mathematics, economics, science, geography, history, government, and civics. Now, these subjects, you see, are somewhat generic, except for the English. The idea that children won't learn their mother tongue is not part of this here. Yes, they will learn mother tongue. That can still be part of the curriculum, but that all children will become fluent in English, because the world of business is using English. It is becoming the language that is just common around the world. And of course, then language arts would be your own native language arts, and that's where you would teach grammar, and you would teach even literature there as well. And then yet acquaint kids with world languages, so that might mean that you'd have a student who might learn Arabic, or they might learn Mandarin Chinese or something like that. So this would have languages. And then, of course, arts, mathematics, economics. So these are the subjects that should be taught in a 21st century school, and that within each of those subjects there needed to be an emphasis on those core skills. Now, the themes that run through this, because this is an interdisciplinary type of curriculum, so that it's not really broken down into discrete subjects, even though you see them listed there. The themes are going to flow from one subject to the next. So these are things you would see in the curriculum: global awareness, and health literacy, and civic literacy, and environmental literacy, as well as financial, economic, business, and entrepreneurial literacy. So those are the themes that you're going to draw upon when you're teaching science, or when you're teaching economics, or mathematics, or even English. Those themes are going to show up over and over again. So this really becomes the framework for the 21st century curriculum. The core subjects, the core themes, and the core skills that will be a part of that curriculum. In addition to the core skills, the Partnership for 21st Century Learning also identified 3 other sets of skills, just a different way of looking at the skills that the students would need to have. Now, we've already talked about the learning skills. Those are the core skills that will be critical to the student. But in addition to that, they've added the information, media, and tech skills. So this is where they're not only learning about technology, but they're using the technology. They're applying technology to the learning. It's not just let's learn word processing, let's learn Microsoft Excel. It's actually using Microsoft Excel as a part of the learning process. Digital citizenship is going to be important. It's an information skill, or a tech skill, depending on where you want to classify it. So digital literacy is going to be something that's going to be important for all students to know how to be a good citizen in a digital world. And then the third set of skills deal with more life-oriented skills, career-oriented skills. These are the skills that are going to help you to be successful. And so flexibility and adaptability, because the one thing we know about the 21st century is that it's going to be a century of change. There's a lot of change happening even now, but it's going to be that way throughout the entire 21st century. So we want to make sure our students understand what it means to be flexible and help them to adapt to ever-changing environmental factors. And then you can see some of the other skills listed there. So certainly having cross-cultural skills, how to work with people from other cultures, other backgrounds, other perspectives is going to be important as well. So these are the skills, all sets of them, the core as well as info, media, and tech, and then life and career skills. These would be the skills that we're going to help each student to acquire so that they will be successful in the 21st century. How can we be sure, though, that all students are going to receive learning experiences that will build a 21st century competency? We can expose them to the framework, but we cannot guarantee that they will receive the same quality of instruction in these areas. So one of the ways that the Partnership for 21st Century Learning could ensure that happening was, first of all, they set up standards that each child would have to meet. And so they've got a listing of standards, and I didn't provide those here. You can find them online. They're readily available. But they have a set of standards that every student is going to be evaluated against. And then next, the assessments that they have created are related to those particular standards. So the assessments and the standards match, where that has not always been the case when it came to educational evaluation. Sometimes the standards were created by one group of people and another group of people created the assessments. And not always was there a complete alignment between assessment and the standard. Then thirdly, one of the ways that you make sure that the instruction is equivalent across the country or even across the world is that you provide professional development for the teachers. You make sure that they know exactly what they need to know in order to teach this curriculum, that they have the latest training in technology. They have the understanding that they need to have in order to teach this. You can't expect people to just pick this up on their own. It's not intuitive. It requires formalized training. And I think you'll see that much of this training eventually will find its way into the university, into preparation programs there, as opposed to doing it out in the schools. But until that happens, there's going to be 21st century professional development. And I would suspect that the school districts that are represented in this conference will be some of the first that are going to get that professional development in how to teach in a 21st century school. You're already getting it now. You're being exposed to the new framework and what it means. And obviously there's more depth that we can put into that framework and actually go over the standards, but that would be a separate training altogether. So you're beginning that process now, even if you didn't realize it. But the professional development is going to continue on, and it will be more specific to teachers and more specific to the subjects that I mentioned in the previous slide. Certainly, the curriculum is going to reflect 21st century goals and objectives, so that's going to change. We're going to give you the strategies in how to teach this curriculum as well. And then finally, we're going to have to modify the learning environment so that they are 21st century friendly environments where students can collaborate easily. So that may mean that we're going to have smaller class sizes so that we can collaborate effectively. It's probably going to mean that there's going to be more investment in infrastructure, technology infrastructure as well. And we've already heard that the Filipino government has decided that is an objective that they want to take on, and bringing more connectivity, internet connectivity that is, to the schools. And with that connectivity, I think you're going to see more technology as well. So environments are going to have to change in order for us to be able to guarantee that there is equal emphasis, equal instruction in these skills. So let's change directions in the final time that we have together, and look at 21st century instruction. Now, I realize that was not part of the original package that I was to present, but I felt like I had to add this in so that you kind of have an idea of what 21st century instruction would be like, because that's going to be something that's going to be taught in preparation programs and in professional development. So if we look at 21st century instruction from a general standpoint, these are the kinds of things that you'll see over on the left-hand side of the slide. They're in green on my computer. So number one, instruction is going to be differentiated, almost to the point that you're going to see all kids having their own individualized education plan. Not just those who maybe are in special education or who need specialized help. All children are going to have their instruction differentiated to meet the needs that they have. Number 2, technology is not going to be a bell or a whistle that you add to the instruction just to make it engaging. It's going to be a necessary part of instruction. And by infused, I mean that it is going to be so important to instruction that you're not going to be able to have instruction unless you have the technology infused within it. Now, we're not there yet, but I think that that's going to be happening. That's coming. We're already seeing virtual education taking place now. And 10 years ago, most of us would have said that's a joke. That's just not going to happen. But one pandemic, and here we are. We have virtual education throughout the Philippines, throughout the world. Number 3. 21st century instruction is founded on the idea that the teacher's job is to establish relationship. We teach from relationship. We teach because we have a connection with our students. And if we do not have that connection, we cannot teach them. They will not learn from us because they don't trust us. And that relationship is what makes it possible for us to teach them. Number 4. Teachers are going to be visionary. They're going to be constantly looking for new and better ways to teach what they've taught before. And so vision is going to be a big part of the learning process. And then finally, we're going to see that change and being able to embrace change is going to be very, very important to 21st century teaching. I'm going to start with number 9 on the specific side because this is really what I think it's going to look like when it's in the classroom. Left side is kind of theoretically looking at 21st century instruction. The right side is what I think you're going to actually end up seeing. Number 9, and I chose that just because I think that's the one that we're probably not most likely to think of, but that education is going to be fun. Teaching and learning is going to be something that people enjoy doing because it is fun. It's not just a drudgery. It's going to be something that they want to do. And then I think jumping up to number 1, you're going to actually see that the main way that students learn is through project-based learning. We're going to make sure that we have defined a set of projects that allow students to explore a topic far more deeply than they would normally do. And it's not going to be just doing some chapter assignment or some worksheet or watch some video, write some essay. I think you're going to see much broader assignments and a whole lot fewer of them, but able to break a big project down into smaller pieces so that the students don't get overwhelmed. I think the next thing you're going to see is more emphasis on engaging the learner in the process and looking at strategies about how to engage learners. And we haven't spent a lot of time in professional development on how to do that. And so I think you're going to see training that specifically looks at how do we engage learners? How do we get them to take ownership of their own learning? And certainly thirdly, there on number 3, you'll see that it's going to be a more collaborative process where there's a lot more group work and students are going to have to work together because that's the way the world of work is going to be. You don't do as many things in isolation anymore. You're part of a team, and that team may even be international where you have a part in one country and a part in another. I taught a course just very recently in community relationships and talk to the students about, and these are students who are going on to become school leaders, how that you cannot teach and educate children in isolation anymore. The community has to be involved. It's a community school, so the community needs to support it. And that may be the businesses in the community, that's community leaders, that's everybody, parents as well. And even people who don't have children, they're part of that school because they're in the community. And I think you're going to see more of that as well. Number 5, How is this going to be implemented? The differentiated instruction. I think, number one, we're going to see that the focus is not on low-order thinking skills, but higher-order thinking skills. So, again, being able to analyze and evaluate and synthesize things. And then, of course, technology is going to be critical. It's not just learning about technology, as I said before. It's going to be about using the technology in particular ways to solve problems or to investigate issues. Next is teachable moments, and I don't know how many of you remember, this is not a new idea, but I think it's one that's being recycled, which is the teachers being taught how to look for opportunities to bring new things into instruction, new conversations. Look for moments where they can use them to teach the kids. It's more of the unexpected opportunities that are available in the classroom, and I think we're going to see that as part of that 21st century curriculum. In other words, that teaching is going to be more responsive to what's going on in the immediate. Not just, I've got this plan of instruction, this is what I'm going to do, but taking advantage of questions that students might ask and using that as the place where you start instruction. And then another very important aspect of the 21st century instruction is going to be on giving students a chance to report what they've learned as a part of the unit or as a part of the particular moment of instruction, and then celebrating that everybody learned something. Now, we may not have all learned the same thing, but that we have learned something. So instruction, as you can see here, is going to be very, very different from what we did in the 20th century versus what we're going to be doing here in the 21st. What I've done on slide 3 here is that I've kind of taken some of those instructional specifics from the 21st century and broken them down. And so I took the project-based one and kind of broke it down so that we could analyze it a little bit easier. So project-based is, there's an overarching project that students are going to work on that is composed of multiple assignments, so that it's not just one huge project, but that it's a series of smaller assignments that are grouped into this bigger project. Because there are multiple assignments, there's going to be opportunities to cross those subject barriers, subject area barriers, and make it very interdisciplinary. So there may be a math and science focus or a math and language arts focus. Grades, daily grades or weekly grades, however you do it particularly, will be based on those smaller assignments that are grouped together to complete that large project. And then the third thing that I think that you'll see with the projects is that they are authentic. They have value in the real world. And see, that's been a complaint that I've had for many, many years, is that a lot of what students are taught to do in school is fill out forms or complete worksheets. And there's very little thinking that goes on other than just rote memory. Remember what the teacher said and do it. And that's not going to be a skill that's going to help them in their world of work, because I think there's going to be more opportunities for them to think critically and use their creativity, their innovation, their problem-solving skills. And certainly you don't get that with worksheets. So the projects are going to have opportunities for them to use those skills, and they're going to have value solving problems that are important to the community or the barangay that surround the school. Now, the way I envision this, and I'm not saying that this is the way it will be, is that there'll probably be one project every 9 weeks or every term, so that you might see 4 major projects over the course of a year. And then you could probably anticipate a couple of grades per week per subject area, depending on how many subject areas are in the project, 1, 2, or 3, or however many you have. You could probably get 2 assignments per week out of each one. And It is those weekly assignments that will be put together to equal that overarching project grade. The instruction that will take place will be focused around the kinds of information that students would need in order to complete the project. And so the instruction will be very targeted. And basically the job of the teacher will be to facilitate this learning process and provide any resources the students might need. Certainly a very different way of teaching. Now, I also know that it's going to be overwhelming to teachers. I get that. And so you may not do project-based learning in every subject you teach. So, you may do it in one subject by creating one project and then or creating two projects a year, one in the fall, where we would have fall, the first term, first semester, and then you might do another one in the second semester. And then as the years go by, you just add to it. So this is not something that you're going to do all at once. It's going to take a few years to get it pulled together. But this is going to be the ultimate outcome of the instruction. I also think there's going to be a need for professional development in this particular area alone, just how to do these projects, how to create projects, and how to create the daily assignments or the weekly assignments that go with it. So this is going to be one of the areas that will come up. I hope that the superintendents that are here at the training will look for ways to bring this kind of professional development to the classroom. So this is the first area that I see in looking at 21st century education, and it's a necessary step that has to be taken. Number two, let's look at the collaborative piece of this. And I think that as you look at the 21st century, we're going to break the students into small groups, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 4 students. And as a part of this, everybody's going to get a job to do when it comes to projects. This is collaboration for the project, not just collaboration in general. It's all going to be targeted towards that project-based learning. So with the project, everybody's going to have a job, a title. Someone's going to be the project manager, and someone's going to be the project recorder and project researcher and whatever. The grades that they get will be individual based on their contribution to the overall project outcome. And each person then, because they're individual grades, are going to be responsible for a part of the project getting done. So no one's going to be able to just sit back and relax while other people do the work of the project. And again, this goes back to how we design the project, so we break it into smaller pieces for the students. And then we create the groups, and we find groups where the students are going to work well together. Now, this is something that you have to teach people, too. Students don't intuitively understand how to do collaborative work, so that's going to be part of the teacher's responsibility, and probably will come through professional development as well. We'll be able to teach kids how to collaborate with other kids. And then you can see here that over the course of the project, jobs will get rotated so that not everybody is going to get stuck in one job that maybe they don't really enjoy as much of another. So they'll have a chance to do many different things and explore different job responsibilities. So collaboration in instruction is going to be important. Again, something that has to be taught to the kids. This is not something that they're going to automatically know how to do. It's going to be something that they're going to have to be taught by the classroom teacher. And number 3, instruction is going to be engaging. And I thought this is one that I wanted to analyze just a little bit, because we hear about engaged learners and what it takes. And here are 3 things that I think it needs to take in order for instruction to be engaging. Even if you're not using a project, this should be part of what you do, so that whatever the thing the student is working on, it has some authenticity to it, so that it's not just make-do work. It's not just, let's get them working on this worksheet while I'm working with another group of students. That it's real what we're asking them to do, and that it's important that we're asking them to do this particular activity. And then secondly, in order for something to be engaging, it has to be real world. It's not make-believe fantasy, because so much of what we do in education doesn't have a counterpart in the real world. And so I don't know how kids make that connection from the classroom to the real world, because so many of the assignments don't have correspondence to the real world. And then finally, that there's value. In other words, that this is something that is important because it's something that would be done in a real job, as opposed to just something that we do in school to teach kids some particular concept. So if we do these three things, authentic, real world, and value, we'll see engaged learners. So, how do we get that? Well, I think what we have to do is we have to bring our community partners in. This is where we're asking them for ideas, even ideas for projects even. And then getting their ideas, then we ask them to be willing to evaluate the projects that are created. And I think one of the things that you can do as a teacher is, once the project is kind of outlined, is to determine if this is something people outside of school get paid to do. In other words, act as a consultant, and they do this research. That is it research that would be interesting to a business or a community out there. So yeah, you could create projects that have that community need, that are sponsored by the community, and then have value in the real world. So one that just comes to mind, and even though we're going to talk about ideas in the next slide, is something to do with recycling. There are so many opportunities to recycle materials, and a good project for the kids to do would be on how to communicate the importance of recycling trash, as opposed to just throwing it in the river or in the canal. How do we recycle it so that it's not littering our streets and roadways, but it's being reused, made into something that's important for the community. So you can get that kind of input by talking to barangay leaders or even provincial leaders. I'm sure they would love to work with the schools to create projects that would be important to them. And then, of course, you're getting engagement when you remind students that what they're doing does have value. It is important. It's authentic, so it's going to be a real job that someone is doing who gets paid to do it. Another way to make sure that the work is engaging is to make sure that it's challenging. We don't want it to be boring. We want it to kind of be interesting, yes. We don't want to make it so difficult the students can't do it either, but that it has the right amount of challenge so it keeps them interested in doing it. And then finally, you're making sure that the work is fun as well. There's no reason why learning can't be fun. We've just allowed it to become that way because we've stopped looking, as teachers, we've stopped looking at ways of making it fun. We like to have fun as adults, and I'm telling you, the kids like to have fun too. And if you can find a way to make learning fun, you'll have no problem engaging learners. Did just a little research, I mean not more than about 10 or 15 minutes, of looking at samples of 21st century instruction that would be doable in your classroom. And this would be things that you could do to use those 21st century skills that were outlined: communication, critical thinking, problem solving, looking at creativity and innovation. So the first one that I found, I thought was very interesting, is having students, and you could do this with upper elementary as well as secondary students is to create a TED Talk. And I don't know if you're familiar with TED Talks, but they're on the internet, and you can just Google TED Talks. And these are talks that relate to technology, entertainment, and design. And basically these are ideas that somebody wants to share with other people. Now, what you could do is ask the students to think of something that they learned from the project or the instruction, and ask them to share that with the entire class. You limit it to maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on how many students you have. It would be a great assessment even of their learning. And they would do this little TED presentation. You would show the kids how TED Talks are done. Get them to write a script. So there's a writing assignment grade, a language arts grade right there. And you could video it if you wanted, or not video it, but have them present it to the class. And if you had the technology, you certainly could use the technology, or you could not. If you don't have the technology, then you wouldn't have to. You just have them do it live. And even you could do it as an individual or as a group. But a TED Talk would give them a chance to reflect on what they've learned and then present that to the entire class. Another idea that came to me was the idea entitled Closing the Loop. And this might be something that you would do in the last few minutes of the class, say maybe the last 10 or even 15 minutes of a class period. You ask the students to reflect on the initial questions of the day. Remember that every lesson starts out with a big question. You ask them to think about the big question. And here's what you're asking the students to do. Is after thinking about that initial question, were their thoughts about that big question confirmed, enhanced, or contradicted? So what they believe. So they already come to class with preconceived ideas, and this gives them an opportunity to say, yep, my ideas were confirmed, I was right, or no, they weren't, they were confirmed, but even more information was added to it. Or were they contradicted? So that could be a closing activity. And you don't have to choose every student. Maybe you're going to choose 5 students to do this with, and they could take a minute each. And then maybe the next day you choose some different students to do it. A third way would be what's called closing connections. And again, it's at the end of the period. They again think back to that initial question, that overarching big question, and this time, they're asked to come up with 5 ways that the content appears outside of the classroom. What's the real-world application of the material? Now, this is deep, because oftentimes teachers struggle to answer students' questions about how this relates to anything outside of the classroom. And many times they cannot tell you that. So this gives you a chance for the students to answer, how do I think that what we learn in school today has value outside of the classroom in the real world? Well, this has been just 3 ideas, and there are thousands more out on the internet. And I found these on the internet, and there are literally hundreds of others. Just time doesn't allow me, I should say, to talk more about these, but certainly you can look at them. Well, this will end my little session here on the 21st century curriculum, and curriculum being the heart of education. I hope you have a great rest of your conference. If you want to get in touch with me, contact the people at the Philippine Professional Linkages from various disciplines. I think they have my contact information, and if you have a question, I'd be glad to respond to that. So take care and have a great rest of your day.